Welcome to this special presentation with author and financial astrologer and oh so much more, Ray Merriman. We're talking about his new book, Jupiter and Saturn Transits, Mastering the Cycles of Life. Ray, thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you for having me, Thomas. It's a great pleasure to be with you again.
And I know that you've been working on this book for most of this year as we're recording this in 2026. But tell us why you chose this phase of your life and career to do a book like this.
Well, as you know, I'm in the latter stages of life, having practiced astrology for nearly 60 years. And I've written many books on astrology, and mostly they've been financial books. But I thought it would be a challenge to take on a very large project at this phase of my life that I think could be a contribution that would be of value to students and professionals of astrology for many, many years to come. And so it came to me that the idea of writing a very thorough, deep book, if you will, a deep search book on the transits of planets to the natal planets, which is something that hasn't been done to the type of a depth that I'm taking on at this point in my life. And by that I mean, this is only the first of 5 books, and it's 420 pages long. I'm going to be writing 5 volumes. I'm going to follow this Jupiter-Saturn with the transits of Uranus, Neptune, Pluto in the North Node. So by the time that I'm done in about 4 or 5 years, I will have written 5 books, 5 volumes, covering about 1,200 to 1,500 pages, which is, again, a depth and a scope of dealing with this very, very important subject for professional astrologers that I don't think has ever been attempted before. So that's why I decided to take it on. I don't have a lot of years left, but the years that I do have, I want to be the most productive years of my life. And so this is a subject, this is a challenge, this is a big project that I've taken on at this stage of my life.
Wow, I am so glad that you have chosen to do this. So you don't see it on here, but it is subtitled Book 1. So that's the explanation for that. You're going to have 4 more.
That is correct. This is book 1. It covers 2 planets, Jupiter and Saturn. Each of them is about 200 and some pages long. And as I mentioned, I'll then follow up with Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, the North Node. And it's not just the major transits to the natal chart and the planets. I'm also covering what are known as the difference between opening or waxing phases of aspects and the closing or the waning phases. In other words, you've got an opening sextile and a closing sextile. You got an opening trine, a closing trine. You got an opening square, a closing square. In addition to that, I'm also, with Saturn anyway, going to cover the semi-square and the sesquiquadrate. So each planet in aspect to the transit of Jupiter or Saturn has many different phases of this cycle of unfoldment that we go through. And I'm interpreting each one of those phases, each one of those aspects, and not considering the opening and closing exactly the same. They're very, very different.
I know most people who are listening to this have an astrological background, but let's not presume and let's make sure that we bring the folks who don't in. When you say outer planets, how is that different from inner planets?
The outer planets that I'm referring to are those beyond the orbit of the Earth around the sun. So we're looking at Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, and Pluto. Now, I know Mars is out there too. It's beyond the orbit of the Earth in a circle around the sun. But the difference is when you deal with Jupiter and beyond, you're dealing with a movement, an orbit around the sun that takes some time to make an aspect. For instance, Jupiter aspecting a natal planet, you're going to begin to feel it about 1 to 2 weeks before. And it's going to last another 1 to 2 weeks, except when it's stationary, it might last 3-4 months. Saturn's even longer. The further out the planet is from the sun, the longer its influence is going to be in effect. When we deal with Mars and the other planets inside the orbit of the Earth around the sun, They're very fast. They only last a couple of days. Mars might last 3 or 4 days, usually only 1 or 2. The Sun, Mercury, and Venus, 1 or 2 days. So when we're talking about mastering the cycles of life, we need to understand that the slower moving planets have a longer and a more profound influence on your decision making, on the transitions that you have in life, the choices that you have in life, and the consequences of those choices that you make. And that's why we're calling this outer planets, because they last longer in their influence, and hence they have a more profound effect on the outcome of your life and the importance of the decisions you make in life at those times that will define the course that your life takes.
You know, we're talking about the structure of the book. We'll come back to this slide probably several times, but you can notice that you talk about here the transits of Jupiter to the natal chart, and then transiting Jupiter through the houses. And your wife actually covered that chapter, so we're honored to have her in the book as well. But I wanted to ask you about Jupiter, because a lot of people get excited when Jupiter comes to their sun sign house.
Yeah.
And it's in there for basically a year, depending on the retrogrades. What are your thoughts on Jupiter coming through either your sun sign or even your first house, your rising sign house?
Well, Jupiter goes through the same sign about every 12 years. And so we call that the 12-year high cycle in your life. And it is a time when you tend to be more optimistic, more confident, more hopeful about your future. And this is one of the differences between Saturn and Jupiter. Jupiter is confident. It looks forward to. It's hopeful about the future. Saturn, on the other hand, has a tendency to be more fearful, apprehensive about the future, and maybe a little remorseful about the past. They both have their values. With Jupiter, as it comes into a transit, your confidence is high. You have opportunities, but do you make the most of those opportunities? Because the transit is only in effect for 1 to 2 weeks or so, unless it's stationary, in which case it's going to last much longer. So this is the thing with Jupiter. You can overestimate. You can be overconfident. It's not the best decision-making period, and it is a time where you have opportunities, but because you're a little bit more complacent and overconfident, you may miss the opportunity that it presents, or you may stay too long because you overestimated that it's going to continue. And so the good times, the confidence times, the happy times that usually come with Jupiter applying to the aspect, and sometimes separating by a couple of degrees, it's very transitory in comparison to Saturn. So we want to make sure that if we want to make the most of this cycle, we got to recognize that this is an opportunity, and it's not going to last forever. So we want to capitalize on it and not just assume it's going to be that way forever. We don't want to miss the opportunity. And in another context, we say that Jupiter is a time when things tend to get exaggerated. As I said before, you overestimate. It's almost like having too much of a good thing, and Saturn's not having enough. So one is never enough, which is Jupiter. I can never get enough, or I never believe that it's going to end. And it's Saturn, which is Saturn is, well, let me back up. Jupiter is always too much. There's a sense that you tend to take things for granted and it becomes too much of something, where Saturn is a sense of lack. And so you have a feeling that there's never enough. So when they're not operating together, it's always a sense of never enough and always too much, where the path of greatest success and happiness and fulfillment in life comes from balancing those two forces together. And that's why I chose to start with the book of transits of Jupiter in Saturn, because when you can find that middle ground, that balance between too much and not enough, you find that path that leads you to fulfillment, to success, to navigating the cycles of life. Okay?
Wow, that is an amazing story. Thank you for sharing. I was going to ask you why you chose Jupiter and Saturn together, and now we know.
That's
I
it.
have
Speaking of
another
heart.
thing that maybe we should do at this point, and that is you start the book with a personal story. Why don't you give
Uh,
us an idea that, because that's what led into really the whole directional thing that you unfold through the book, too.
well, I'm going to take this in segments. The first segment is in 2021 during COVID, right after COVID, um, when I thought to write a book on transit. That's when it first came to me that astrology needs a book, a very deep dive book on transits, and I need to write something. I need a large project at this point in my life to have a sense of great purpose, if you will. So I need to take on a large project. So I decided to ask people, what was the turning point in your life that defined who you became in life? So I asked specifically for people who've been through at least 2 Saturn returns. I asked this in my Facebook audience at the time, and I got over 30 responses of people who have been to at least 2 Saturn returns, who knew what the big turning point in their life was that defined what their life became. And what I found out is that it was the outer planets, especially Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, making a hard aspect to the ruler of the chart, the ruler of the ascendant. That was the most important one. That's the thing that showed up most frequently. Almost as frequently was those same planets crossing an angle, the ascendant, midheaven, descendant, nadir. And so I looked back at my own life and thought, what defined my life? Well, I've been through a couple of Saturn returns, and I thought, what am I? What has my life become? What defines me? What's the overriding characteristic of my life? And I thought, everybody thinks of me as an astrologer or a financial market timer, but really what I do, what has defined my life, is writing. I've written 50 forecast books now in my life. I've written 3 major astrology books, I think, and about another 10 or so financial books, which are all research oriented. But the common thread of all of these is that every day I wake up and I write, I research and I write. And it fits because my ruling planet is Mercury. I'm Virgo rising. So Mercury is my ruling planet, which is the planet of a writer. It's in the 3rd house, which is a house of a writer. It's in Sagittarius, which means I'm rather prolific. I've written several books. And then I went back and looked at, did these outer planets make aspects of my Mercury or cross my angles at those times? And it turns out in 1966, I came down with hepatitis. I was working for my father's paint company, and I contacted hepatitis. And one day I'm getting ready I'm supposed to wake up and go to work, and I couldn't get out of bed. I'm thinking, what is wrong with me? I just can't get out of bed. I get up and I want to go back to sleep. And so I slept the whole day. And the next day my mother comes in and says, we're taking you to the doctor. So she took me to the doctor, and it turns out I had hepatitis. But the interesting thing was, this was between my 2nd and 3rd year of college, my sophomore and junior year of college. And I was studying business administration. And I was doing very well, but I didn't have any passion to be a businessman, to be a business administrator. And so when I got the hepatitis, what happened was every day I would go into a dream state and I would have visions. I would see things, and I loved going to sleep and having my dreams. I didn't like waking up and feeling awkward and out of balance and dizzy. So I'd go back to bed and I'd go back to my dream state. Well, I did this for about 2 or 3 months because you don't get over hepatitis real quickly. I had to take off the whole term of my junior year of college. And during that time, I realized that I wasn't on a path that I was passionate about. I didn't have great desire, motivation to go into business. Instead, I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to do something creative. And so I changed my major from business to psychology. But that allowed me to take a lot of other elective courses, which I took on creative writing. I took on different philosophies in the world, especially Far Eastern philosophies. And through all of this, my whole path in life changed from a business path that I didn't want to do, even though I was doing well at it, to a more creative and eventually even a more spiritual path, if you will, that led me into Far Eastern philosophies, religions, eventually metaphysics. And it wasn't long after that. And by the way, this is when Uranus and Pluto were conjunct, exactly square my Mercury. Big turning point in life. Saturn was in opposition, all at 16 Virgo, 16 Pisces, T-square my Mercury at 16 to Sagittarius. I got ill. It was happening in my 12th house. I got ill. I started having visions. Neptune was on my Jupiter at the time. And I had a big transformation in my decision making of what I wanted to be in life. And shortly after that, 1 year after that, Uranus crossed my ascendant. And that's when I was introduced to astrology in 1967. And it's almost like immediately I knew that even though I was in psychology, and I went into psychology because I didn't want to be in business, that the astrology was the answer to what I was searching for in psychology, which was, who am I? What am I here for? There it was in astrology. And that set the tone for my life for the rest of my life. And that was in 1966, 67. So that's the backstory of how this book actually was conceived before it actually started the writing part of it in 2020, 2021.
You know, there are not many people on the planet who probably genuinely could say, thank God for hepatitis.
Very good, Thomas. Yeah, it turned out. And this is the thing about transits. You know, they may be hard, they may be difficult, they may be challenging, but they also offer incredible learning experiences. And if you can take that lesson that it brings to you through the experience you underwent and make a decision that transforms your life into the direction that is more exciting as well as challenging, then you got something. You're on the path toward mastering the cycles of life. So there you go.
Well, and that was something I wanted to ask you, is your approach to studying this, because in your market timing research, it is very analytical study, and you go back and look at things 50, 60, 100 years or more back and find patterns and things like that. Is that how you approach this too, or do you have another style for the astrology?
It's a combination. I mean, as I said, I started out by doing a survey of some 30 plus people to get an idea of what were the aspects, what were the transits in their life that determined the direction their life would take. So that was a bit of a scientific approach. It was, very rugged, if you will, primal. And it's unlike the other books I've written on financial astrology, where I actually go back and look at every day, every week, every month, every year of a different market and see if I can if I can identify certain patterns of highs and lows, and in the phases, the breakdowns into 2 or 3 phases of those cycles. So my former books that I've written on financial astrology and market timing and cycles especially has been a very rigorous research and rather, scientific pattern recognition, mathematical, quantitative study type of endeavors. This had a little bit of that just to give me an idea of whether or not I'm on the right track. But the actual writing, the delineation of these transits comes more from my experience in dealing with people as an astrologer, as a financial consultant, knowing their chart, So it's a lot of experience has gone into this book, the delineation of it. And what I found was there are there are many there are many important aspects to this idea of transits in aspect and natal planets and their angles and their angular midpoints. On the one hand, it does have a predictive quality. It certainly is probably the most accurate tool for prediction of a time that a person makes a big turn in their life. Of any of the tools that we have in astrology, there's nothing that I found that's more accurate, more useful, more valuable in predicting the time that an individual is likely to go through a crisis, a conflict, an important decision-making process in their life, or an opportunity in their life, than the transits of the outer planets to the natal planets and their angular midpoints and the angles themselves. So yeah, this book is mostly written as a result of my experience, my observations. It started with a quantitative study, a survey, but the actual interpretations are based on my experiences and what type of events could generate these changes in life. And if they're not events, what types of conflicts, of challenges are arising in a person's consciousness that gives them the opportunity to change their patterns in life, to master the cycles in life that are represented by these major outer planet transits to the natal horoscope.
Well, you made an interesting comment in the book. You said that whenever people seek out an astrologer for a reading, understanding transits is the number one reason and the most important reason why they come to an astrologer. I'd love to hear further thoughts and words from you on that point because it is a big one.
Well, when do people usually come to an astrologer? It's usually for two reasons. Some come to you because they're curious as to what their future holds. But most of the time, a client will come to you because they have a crisis. They have a conflict. They have a problem in their life. They got to make a decision. And they don't necessarily want to make that decision. They want to know what astrology says about that. And from my work on evolutionary astrology that we believe that every moment of time has its own unique quality. Anything born in that moment takes on the quality of it. So by understanding what is going on at that moment in time for that individual who has come to you for an answer, but really what they want and need, I think, is an understanding of what they're going through, what their choices are, and guidance as to what the consequences of the choices they may make here will have upon their future. And so this is valuable to the astrologer. By knowing the nature of the transits going on to the individual's chart, you have an understanding of the dynamics of the themes in play in that person's life at this time. And if you allow them to explain what their crisis or conflict or challenge or interest in having an astrological consultation is now, you can serve a tremendously valuable role in helping them make that decision by understanding not just the themes they're going through, but what the choices are and what the potential consequences of those choices are by nature of the transits that will follow from this time. So that's why I think that understanding transits, is the most important tool in the tool chest of a professional astrologer, and also the most important skill that an aspiring astrologer, student who wishes to become an astrologer, can develop, because that is the need in most cases that an astrologer has when dealing with a client who comes to him or her at that point, needing that kind of guidance, those kinds of answers, those kinds of possibilities that you can provide through your knowledge of understanding transits.
When you can advise somebody to help them on their path like that, it's one of the highest honors that you can do, is sit with a client, isn't it?
Is mutually exciting, mutually satisfying, because when you see that the client gets it, you see that eureka moment in their life, like, oh yeah, now I understand what I'm going through. And then not only do you have a sense of satisfaction because you gave them that understanding, but it then inspires you to go to the next step. Okay, now that we understand that, we have these choices. And here's the kinds of consequences, the kind of actions you can take, and the kind of, effects, consequence again, if you will, that can manifest from that. What choice do you want to make? And here's the thing, that many people who come to you and have a problem, it's a pattern. It's a psychological pattern. This isn't the first time this rodeo has been entered into by this person. Relationships for many people always end. And the only person who's present in those ending of the relationships in all cases is you. So what is it about you? It's not always the other person. It may be about the type of people that you attract, but why do you attract those other people? Well, if you can understand those patterns and how you can break those patterns through understanding them and making different choices, you are actually facilitating growth in that person's quest to have a fulfilling life. And I think that's the highest purpose of an astrologer, to help the individual make the choice, not to make the choice for them, but to give them the understanding and the awareness of the choices before them and the potential consequences that are happening at this time in their life as a result of the themes indicated by the nature of those planets in that aspect. And it's also interesting to me that under the most difficult aspects of Saturn, which are usually high anxiety times, people will oftentimes make a decision to break a pattern. Okay, I'm not going to fall into this type of relationship again. I'm not going to, be overly critical, micromanage, overly controlling. I see where my problem is in the relationship. I'm going to consciously make efforts to change that pattern from this day forward. And if they're committed to it, which Saturn can be, then you alter the course of your life. You master that cycle point in your life. And that's, I think, the greatest value astrology has to humankind, to help individuals master the cycles of life, to find a path that offers greater happiness, greater fulfillment, and breaks the pattern to release the passion of creativity in controlling your own life instead of being controlled by the external forces and the repetitive patterns that keep arising in your life.
No, that is beautifully said. Thank you. That's a keeper right there. That's a keeper. Let's go take a look at a couple of things here. We've been pretty good, actually. We've done a good job of not being too techie here astrologically, but yet, enough. But let's dive under the surface a little bit here on a couple of things. I wanted to point out particularly the structure of chapters 5 and 6, 4 as well, but particularly chapters 5 and 6, because there's a lot there that you don't see from this simple table of contents. You take Jupiter and you compare it to every natal position, and if I counted right, you do it with 13 different breakdowns of the aspects. And you mentioned this earlier, but the waxing and the waning. So let's first, if you would, define what those mean, and then how are they significant? Why did you do it? Because you did it for Jupiter, and then in chapter 6 for Saturn.
Yeah, with Jupiter, I use the 8 major aspects. I use the conjunction, the waxing semi-sextile, the waxing square, the waxing trine, the opposition, the waning trine, the waning square, the waning sextile. There's 8. And then I added, for Saturn, the waxing semi-square, the waxing sesquiquadrate, the waning sesquiquadrate, and the waning semi-square. So there's 12 of those. And I broke them down because they're different. First of all, let's define what waxing is. Many astrologers call it the opening phases. So when you start with the conjunction, that's where the cycle begins. And as the transiting planet moves away from the natal planet, it separates. It goes from the conjunction to the opposition. That's called the opening hemisphere, the opening part of the aspect, or the waxing part is is increasing. If it's the sun and the moon, for instance, going from new moon to a full moon, so the moon is increasing in light. Well, it's the same thing with conjunction of planets. When you go from a conjunction with a transit to a natal planet, then after the conjunction, it begins to wax, it begins to wane and go toward the opposition. That's the growth phase of the cycle identified by those two planets. This is where you are initiating action in the world. You're initiating activity. You're bold, you're growing, you're taking risk. And they don't always work out, but ultimately you keep growing. You make mistakes, but you make it through those times. So even with mistakes, even with errors, even with times where you have a little pitfall here and there, you make it through those crises as you continue up to the opposition, which is sort of like the peak of the creativity, the peak of the initiative spirit of those two planets in your life. And then you plateau out. After the opposition, you plateau out. And now you're coming into waning phase. From the opposition to the conjunction, that transiting planet is decreasing in light, if you will, is starting to close its distance back toward the conjunction. So this is a plateau phase. This is a phase where you are now, again, dealing with the consequences, resolving the conflicts, resolving the crisis. You're becoming quite good at solving problems. Okay, it's not that you're as creative. You're still creative, but not as creative. You're becoming more masterful. You know, we have a saying in life that life doesn't get easier as you get older. You just become better at managing it. Well, that's what's happening when you're going from the opposition to the conjunction. You're becoming better at managing the problems, the issues signified by these two planets. So as they close toward the conjunction, you're ending cycles. One of my favorite ones to explain this is sort of the sextile. Okay, a waxing sextile. That's where you have a lot of creative thoughts. You're getting new ideas that you want to test in the world. Whereas at the waning sextile, it's not that you're getting new ideas. You've already had the ideas, but now you're beginning to revere those ideas, beginning to celebrate those ideas, beginning to experience the rewards of those ideas that you initiated way back at the time that they were in a waxing sextile. So one is opening up the ideas of the waxing sextile. The other is closing out those ideas of the sextile as you're going toward the conjunction. So that's the beauty and the depth indicated by the book that I've just written. I mean, I do think it's done in such a fashion. Yes, it's a reference book. It's a reference book, and that's the value of it too. This is something that's going to last, I think, for many, many years. You're going to refer to this for many, many years. But it's also explains and differentiates between the different types of the same named aspect. The sextile, is it an opening sextile or a closing sextile? The trine, is an opening trine, closing trine? The square, opening or closing square? There is a difference here. One is going up the scale, so to speak. The other is closing the scale. And I think that's very, very valuable for astrologers to understand when they deal with clients coming into them for consultations, and understanding where they are at each phase of the cycle that's making an aspect.
Well, that's very important to your MMTA program that I'm in right now, and learning that and the importance of that relative to the financial predictions, but also here too as well. Interesting. I was going to say, my takeaways when you asked me to take a look at the book was kind of a three-legged stool, and you just mentioned them, but I'd like to put my own summary to it and just ask you to nod your head yes or no, either way. Okay. But you mentioned as a general astrological knowledge learning tool, and anybody who could care less about their financial perspectives. Maybe they've got it locked up with a financial advisor and they are not interested in that. They're going to learn astrology, no doubt. The second area is the resource of these two planets in all the aspects that you just mentioned to our natal chart. So that's number two. So as these aspects form, you go grab the book, get it off the shelf, turn to that page, boom, you read that section. It's a reference book for that moment in time. And then the third, obviously, is the financial piece. Would you agree that does that kind of summarize how the book stands?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Yeah, you it has value in each of those areas. Now, I want to say something about the financial ranking. We want to be a little bit careful here. Yes, I rank them from each aspect for traders and investors from a scale of -3, which is the most challenging, to a +3, which is probably the most opportunistic. Now, even though I give it a financial ranking, it's really more of a judgment ranking, okay? And it's based on classical astrology as well as what my observations are with traders and investors during these times. So generally speaking, when you have a hard aspect, like a square, a semi-square, whether it's waxing, waning, opening, or closing, sesquiquadrate, or trine or a sextile, whatever aspect it is, even if it's a difficult aspect, and especially if it's a difficult aspect or a hard aspect, as I just mentioned, it's a challenging time, and you got to be careful of the judgments you make, especially if it's Jupiter, because you can be overestimating. You can make poor judgments at this time, and that's why they're rated -1, 2, or 3. Usually the squares are -3s. The semi-squares -2s, the sesquiquadrates maybe -1s, because when Jupiter's in these kinds of aspects, natal planets, you tend to be too complacent, overestimative, or overconfident. So you can make poor judgments and have losses. On the other hand, when they're in favorable aspects, soft aspects like trines and sextiles, whether opening or closing, you have opportunities. Maybe you've made gains on your trades, on your investments. This might be the time to cash in. Or maybe you're getting a pay raise or a bonus in your job, or maybe you have a job interview and you do very well and you're offered a new position. So even though I give these a financial ranking for investors and traders, if you're not an investor or trader, it can still be significant in its manifestation in your life, how it unfolds in your life. And you, as the individual undergoing this aspect, need to understand that it has to do with your judgment, okay? If you're under a favorable aspect, you tend to make favorable judgments going into it, but don't stay with it too long, because once it passes, that opportunity, that gain that you made may also pass. If you're a trader, you may hang on a position too long and your gains turn into losses. If you're interviewing for a job and you got a job that acceptance of your application and you're excited about it, but you don't accept it right away, then it may fade. It may not be there. Somebody else may get it because you took too long to answer it when the aspect was present. So this is the importance of understanding this financial ranking. It's really a judgment ranking, and understand that as you're going into the aspect, as you're applying to it, the conditions become more amplified. But as you leave it, they begin to diminish in their intensity. So you want to make the most of it going into a soft aspect, which can be very profitable, but you also don't want to hang on too long, because a gain can turn into a loss real quickly if you're not careful.
And I'd like to just show people where that shows up in the book. What you're talking about there is the transits of Jupiter in Chapter 3 and then the transits to Saturn in Chapter 5. Both of those chapters have that financial section for each of the planets.
And each of those sections are the longest part of the book because they're it's really the crux of the book, what people are going to be using to refer to for many, many years.
You know, I've seen in your work something that I always like to hear when you talk about it, just solidifies it. I initially learned a conjunction was only and always positive. You also will set a conjunction up as a challenging aspect. How do you view conjunctions?
Yeah, well, classically in astrology, a conjunction involving benefics and neutral planets is considered positive. And when it involves malefics like Saturn, Mars, Pluto, in a conjunction is considered more difficult and challenging. I look at the conjunction as very powerful. It's the end and the beginning of a cycle. Does the cycle end, in a negative way, in a way that leaves a bad taste in your mouth, in your mind? Or does it begin with the sense of excitement that you're about to begin a new project with great anticipation, with great, a sense of anticipation that it could be something favorable, something new that's going to result in something wonderful in your life. So as far as the financial ranking in the judgments, it depends, I think, at the conjunction on your willingness to break old patterns that have been limiting your growth in life versus opening up to new possibilities and challenges and directions that can increase the possibility of growth in your life. So you'll see a lot of times the rankings will be anywhere from -3 or +3 under a conjunction. And it depends on your willingness to break a pattern and to seek a new course in your life. The same thing is true with an opposition. A lot of people think the opposition is inherently negative or difficult. It's not. It's a peak experience. It's a point of great awareness. Now you might become more aware of the difficulties and the challenges and the conflicts and the crises in your life, but that's actually a good thing if you become more aware of it, because then you're more likely to change the behavior, to change the mindset, to lead to that kind of a conflict and crises. So with oppositions and conjunctions, I'll oftentimes say they're +3 or -3. It could be either, or 0, I suppose, because you might decide to just default and do nothing. But the key is, are you willing under the conjunction opposition to make a decision to alter a pattern that has been problematic in your life and open up a new avenue of behavior, of decision making that breaks that old pattern and can lead to, I would say, tremendous success, tremendous possibilities of happiness? It's really up to the individual at that point what they decide. If they decide to stay with the old pattern, then the pattern is going to continue. There's going to be many, many more moments in the next cycle that begins there of remorse, regret, wishing I had done it differently. Versus if you made the decision and sought a new course, then you have, I think, a greater sense of excitement, passion for what you're doing in life, willingness to maybe, make some mistakes. I like a quote that I made in the book by Muhammad Ali. He said, "You don't lose if you're knocked down. You only lose if you stay down." And I think that's true with the conjunction opposition. You may get knocked down at that point, but if you stay down, you're in trouble. If you get up and move forward, continue going forward with your life, and don't let that hold you back, it's amazing what type of opportunities and avenues that will open up for you. And that's what I tried to get across with that quote in much of this book.
Wow. Well, you know, that's the thing, is there is so much depth of information in between these lines of these chapters that I wanted people to understand that you're going to get a tremendous amount of astrological insight. There's another one that you bring up, and then we're going to pivot here in just a minute to talk about some things going on currently in 2026 when this is recorded. I'd like to get your thoughts. But derivative houses, your technique for derivative houses, can you explain how that works?
Yeah, I have my own methodology here. of derivative houses, and it's important as a subplot to all the interpretations I'm giving. Of course, the most important things are the transits to the natal planet. But we don't know what the houses are, and they play a very important role. We can't do a book on everybody's chart. We can only do a book on aspects, which many people will share. They'll know when the aspect is in effect. But there is a subplot of derivative houses that I use to add another dimension to the meaning of these aspects. For instance, I'll put the natal planet as if it's on the ascendant. So imagine that the natal planet we're looking at, Jupiter and Saturn transiting, or Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. Imagine the natal planet is on the ascendant. Where is the transit of Jupiter and Saturn, whatever planet you're looking at, in reference to that planet being on the imaginary ascendant? Because the houses themselves have meanings that are based on separations from the ascendant, okay? And the aspects do too. For instance, if I'm dealing, as I mentioned before, with a waxing sextile, okay, that means it's 60 degrees separating from the conjunction. You had the conjunction, and then 60 degrees later, you have the transit of the sextile, the opening sextile. Well, if I put that natal planet on the ascendant, then the transit at the waxing sextile would be on the third house cusp in an equal house system, which is what I use for this derivative house method. So it's going to have a third house quality to it. The third house is the mind, the intellect, the communications. So for instance, my generation, the Pluto and Leo generation, has Pluto and Leo, Neptune in Libra. So right now, if I put Neptune on the ascendant in Libra, for many of those in my generation, Jupiter is going into Leo and it's going to sextile it. So it's a waning sextile because Jupiter is closing toward the Neptune in Libra. Well, when Jupiter was in the waxing sextile, which would have been Sagittarius, because Sagittarius is 2 signs away from Neptune in Libra. So as a waxing sextile, when Jupiter was in Sagittarius, it has a third house quality. So what does that mean? Well, Jupiter sextile Neptune is a time of great, it's where the mind is very creative, very aesthetic, poetic, musical, prolific in writing. Jupiter in third house would have in a waxing sextile would have a subplot of being very prolific in one's writing. Very poetic, perhaps, very eloquent in the nature of how they write. Whereas the waning sextile, okay, which is 60 degrees before Neptune, which is in Leo, which my generation is going through, that's a closing sextile of Jupiter and Neptune. So you're still creative, you're still imaginative, but you're creative and imaginative in a way that has 11th house qualities, which is bringing friends together. In many cases, it may be like bringing friends together for the last time. It's a time of celebration, or maybe it's a reunion celebration for the life that we lived together, the path that we shared together. And the reason I bring up my generation is because we're having a major conference coming up called UAC, the United Astrology Conference. And there's a group of us known as the Legacy Alumni of Astrology. We are the ones who from 1980 to about 2008 revolutionized astrology from a hobby to a profession that is now employed by, I would say, hundreds of thousands of astrologers now, whereas before 1980, certainly even 1990, you only had a handful of astrologers who made a living doing astrology. Now you got hundreds of thousands throughout the world, and I think our generation, my generation, Neptune and Libra, played a role in this. So here we are in September, early September at UAC, and we're going to have our own party at that, our own dinner party, a private dinner party of those of us who shared that path, who played a role in transitioning astrology from a hobby to a profession. And we're going to meet, and it's probably the last time that we're all going to be, many of us are going to be together in this lifetime. So it's a wonderful moment amongst many memorable moments we shared together in this life with a common purpose. But it's a wonderful moment for us to bring a closure to this path that we shared for the last 45, 50 years. And that's an example of Jupiter's sextile a generations Neptune, a chance to get together with long-term friends or people you've worked with for many, many years and bring it to a celebratory close and a reunion. So this is how that aspect is working for many of us who were born in the late 40s, early 50s.
How do you top that? And where do we go next? That was beautiful. And I hope it's a wonderful time for all of you. And I know that everybody watching this, downline of that effort that group did for all of us, are so grateful to each of you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. It's been our pleasure. It's really been, it's given us a generational purpose. I mean, we came into this lifetime, we knew that we were somewhat different. Pluto and Leo can be colorful, it can be agonizing, it can be dramatic, it can be offsetting, but we were very colorful and we were very creative. And the Neptune and Libra says we're very romantic, very idealistic. We're the ones that created the idea of make love, not war, make peace, not war. And we've continued that idealism all through our life as astrologers. And the idea of Pluto and Neptune, as it's returning again to a sextile, has been part of our legacy of bringing astrology into the group of helping professions as psychology. The modern day astrologer started as an outgrowth of an interest in psychology as well as metaphysics. Okay, so psychology, the whole psychology profession, is probably the keynote to the idea of a helping profession. Social work, psychology, they're all related. Well, astrology belongs in that category, in that line of professions that have the destiny, the purpose to help other people, to guide them through life, to help them reach a point of fulfillment, of psychological well-being. And that's what we've done. That's what we're doing. That's what we've done. And we're going to, we've done that all of our life. And so we're bringing a closure to that right now.
Well, like I say, all of us who are downstream are standing on very tall shoulders, and we know it, and we are grateful. Hey, I would like to ask you, with that body of knowledge of all those years, decanates is something that I've always seen multiple ways that people line up the 3 decanates within a sign. How do you do it? Why? And would you talk through that for us?
That's an interesting subject because it does bring into play this concept of cycles. Most cycles in financial markets are based into 2 or 3 phases. Well, the decanate is a 3-phase division of a sign. It's every 10 degrees. And the classical interpretation of a decanate from an astrological point of view is to consider the first 10 degrees the same sign as the sign itself, and the middle 10 degrees the next sign of the same element, and the final 10 degrees the last sign of the same element before it gets back to that to the sign itself. I look at it a little bit differently. I oftentimes wonder, why should the first third be the most powerful point that reflects the quality of the sign itself? Why is it not the middle? And so in evolutionary astrology, I presented it that way, that really the middle decanate, the 10 to 20 degrees, would be the most reflective of the qualities of the sign itself. So instead of calling the middle decanate the decanate of the next sign of the same element, I decided to call it the sign of the same element. And the first 10 degrees would be the sign of the element that preceded that sign, and the last 10 degrees, the element of the sign that follows the sign. So for instance, let's say that you're a Scorpio. Maybe you're early Scorpio. And classical astrology would say, okay, the first 10 degrees, you are Scorpio sign, but you're also Scorpio decanate. In my technique, I would say that your decanate would be the water sign that is before Scorpio, which would be Cancer. So you'd be a Scorpio with a Cancer overtone. If your sun is, or whatever planet you're looking at, is the middle degrees, 10 to 20, that would be the double Scorpio. That would be the heart and the most powerful part of the Scorpio, reflecting the qualities of Scorpio. Now, having said that, I also want to say that I'm a great believer in the eightfold division that Dane Rudger presented, who is really, in my mind, the true pioneer of the modern day astrologer. And his lunation cycle, the eightfold lunation cycle, I think really has stood the test of time. And in this case, I would say if we break each sign into 1/8 segments, so that the first 1/8 is about what, 3 3/4 degrees, I think that's the most turbulent point of any sign. And to bring this into current conditions, consider that all the planets, all the outer planets, well, Jupiter's just moved out a little bit, but Pluto, Uranus, Neptune, and Saturn's moved out of it too, but they were all in the last year in the first 1/8 of a sign. The most turbulent part of moving into a new sign is the first 1/8, because you're coming out of what, 30 years of the previous sign, 30 years in the case of, I shouldn't say 30 years, 30 degrees. You're coming out of 30 degrees of the previous sign. In the case of Pluto, it was in Capricorn for 15 years. Now all of a sudden you're in Aquarius. That's a very, very big change, and that causes turbulence. Same thing with Neptune. It was in Pisces, very mellow Pisces, right? Very easily influenced, naive, idealistic Pisces, but now it goes into the warrior sign of Aries. Very big change, going from peace to war. And then you look at Uranus in Taurus, which is the financial sign, and a sign that seeks stability. But Uranus is anything but stability. And now it's gone to Gemini, which is chaos on top. With Uranus in Gemini, it's very chaotic, so it's very turbulent. So you have all these outer planets moving the first 1/8 of a sign, and that's been since really 2003 through this year to 2026, an extremely turbulent time. Things will begin to settle down, I think, once we get past 2026. When I say settle down, they don't go back to normalcy. It's a process. It really won't get to the normal functioning where we understand the dynamics of each sign until we get to those middle 10 degrees, the middle decanate. But I think that's one way to look at signs too, instead of just in 1/3 segments. Look at it 1/8 segments to understand the turbulence of the period we've been especially going through since 2023, 2024.
Thank you so much. That was worth the ticket in the door here. I appreciate that very much. Here's another one that's worth the ticket, and this is kind of the sleeper. See, we made people, the term they say, wait for it, wait for it. Well, this is one of the wait for it's right here. Would you explain what's going on?
Okay, this is the Saturn cycle, the business cycle we call it. And I think the phrase was first coined by John Townley, astrologer, musician, artist from New York City. He wrote many books, but in one book, he talked about the business cycle. Now, the way I interpret this is that when Saturn is going up your chart, which means it conjuncts the nadir, and then it starts going through the 4th house, 5th house, it's going up the chart. This is the western part of the chart, just to be technical here for a second. So Saturn is moving from the eastern part of the chart to the western part of the chart. The western part of the chart is other people, okay? It's other people, you dealing with other people. So is Saturn representing the planet of attainment, ambition, accomplishment, completion, commitment? As Saturn goes up the chart, your ambition to do well in the world, to accomplish, to attain noteworthy things in the world begins to increase. You begin to compare yourself, not just by your own standards, but compare yourself to what the world judges success in its external domain to be. So here's Saturn going up the chart. And as Saturn goes up the chart, your ambition, your desire, your motivation to accomplish begins to increase, and it keeps going up till it gets to the midheaven. That's like a peak. Okay, so at the nadir, you're at a point usually of discontent. You're feeling kind of alone, kind of isolated, kind of in a cave, if you will. In fact, some people have heard say that when Saturn's on the nadir, I wish I could find a cave. They want to go into a cave. They think of, if they're spiritually oriented, they used to think, I'm going to go live in the ashram. I'm going to go live in a commune. I'm going to give up my life in the world and find time and space to find myself, to discover myself, discover my purpose in life. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to go deep within myself. Well, that's not unusual with Saturn on the nadir. But now as you begin to come out of it, you begin to realize you can't live in that cave. You can't live the whole of your life in the ashram unless you're the guru. There's something in you that's calling you. You have a calling in life, and this calling is starting to well up in you. So you have this urge to go back into the world, to do something significant in the world, to find a career, to find a purpose in life. And so you start taking more risks. You start coming out and taking on more challenges. And yeah, as it goes up the chart, you're going to have your periods of disappointment, of failures, if you will, of mistakes. But as Muhammad Ali said, don't stay down. You're not out of it if you're knocked out. You're only out of it if you stay down. So get up, and you do. You get up. You learn from those mistakes. You go forward, and it goes all the way to midheaven, which begins to be, that's the plateauing phase. That's where you kind of reached a peak in your life where the work that you did can carry you forward from this point forward, and that continues really strong to get the midpoint of the midheaven ascendant. That's, to me, the really critical point where you gotta really be attentive. And fortunately, Saturn does give you awareness, the opposition especially on the midheaven. But Saturn gives you awareness. It gives clarity. It gives you reality. It's almost like this AI, when it was asked what is reality, it first said truth, and then said, let me modify it. It's truth without the bullshit. Okay, this is Saturn. This is Saturn on the midpoint of the midheaven and ascendant. What is your purpose? Are you going to go toward the midheaven, which is your calling in life, your purpose in life, or are you going to go to the ascendant, which is, to me, that's the basic ego structure. People think the sun is the ego. I think the ascendant is the ego, because that separates light from dark. That separates the lower part of the chart from the upper part of the chart. So as we're going down the chart, it's not that you're not successful, it's that you're not as motivated to be ambitious and successful. Yeah, you still want to succeed, but you're not initiating the new things in your life. You're sort of plateauing and fine-tuning and modifying the things that you've already put into place. You're managing your life better at this point. You become very, very good at resolving conflicts, resolving problems. But you're not necessarily ambitious until you get to the nadir again. That's sort of like the realization that, okay, what I've been doing, it's been good, it's served its purpose, but I need a new purpose. I need a new challenge in life. And that the nadir, think of that as like the conjunction, beginning of the new cycle. So you kind of go deep within yourself. You take a break from being in the world. You go deep within. It's an inner reality. And you reconfigure, you reinvent yourself. And then you start to bring out this new you. You start going back up the horizon. And so this is a business cycle. I call it the business. I think Tom would call it the business cycle. From the nadir to the midheaven, the transit of Saturn there is the motivation, the drive to succeed in the world. And from the midheaven to the nadir is managing the success, managing the accomplishments, if you've had them. From that point onward to get back to the nadir and you take on a new challenge again.
We turned your evolutionary astrology book into an audiobook, and It was one of the chapters. There were two chapters, kind of cousin chapters there, and that another version of this, and then of course it's in this book. And I just looked at that and compared it obviously to my own path, and it is so spot on. It's like, wow, it is so accurate. Let
It's
me
like
get
reading chapters of your book of life, isn't it?
it is.
Every
It
point on
is.
that and that eightfold movement is a different chapter of your life. Very interesting and very important, I think.
I know you put a lot of intention and importance into the covers of your books. Would you walk us through
Yes,
what's
I
going
do.
on here?
We got two covers. We got the outside front cover and the inside the front cover. The outside the front cover, which is the left part of your screen here, shows the pathway between Saturn and Jupiter. It's the middle path, and that's the path that I'm suggesting is the path of success and fulfillment in life. You need to find that middle path that blends the never enough and too much parts of Saturn and Jupiter, and it leads you to a door, and it opens up to Earth. So this is a door where you find your way, but through Jupiter and Saturn, the midpoint of Jupiter and Saturn, you find your way back to the home that you really never left. Your place in the universe is still there, but you had to go out and come back and find this middle path. The inside front cover, which is the right-hand side of the book, shows the path to the door and opens up to the outer universe, to the unlimited potential. So in one case, you're opening a door to unlimited potential by going out into the universe, into the brave new world that you have no idea what awaits you. And the other one is a path back to the home that's very familiar, very comfortable, that you never left. And this is again the dynamics of Jupiter and Saturn. One wants to go out and expand, the other wants to come in and find safety. And that's the meaning of these two covers, the front cover and the inside front cover.
I'm a water sign, and when I narrated the Forecast 2026 book to audio, you had the section there at the beginning where you described the cover. And I'm in the booth. I can't talk because it's so beautiful with the kids. The kids is what got me. And you doggone it, you almost did it again here. You almost shut this interview down.
I take great pride in creating or finding people who can create the types of images I imagine in my mind that symbolize the meaning of what the book is going to be. So again, I take great pride in every forecast book cover I do and every cover of every book that I do. I want it to be meaningful and provoke deep thought, deep contemplation of what is he trying to say here? What do these images evoke in me as a reader? So that's my purpose.
Yeah, that's great. And it's a beautiful cover. We've gone a while here, and thank you for your time. But let's bring this home to right now, because as we're recording this, just the day before, you put a quote in the free weekly forecast that came out. And I'd like to visit this for just a second, if you don't mind, because this takes all the outer planet energy that we've been talking about and brings it right here. You said, after Saturn conjoins Uranus in 2032, then all the planetary cycles of Saturn to planets beyond its orbit will be in their waxing or opening phase. Well, now we can understand that. And you said that has not been seen since 1989 through September 2001, a time when there was world peace between those years. Saturn was in its waxing phase to all those outermost planets. And that same outermost planet waxing phase with Saturn will be underway after 2032. Now, I'm just getting chills even reading that again. That's exciting.
Yeah. Well, okay. So let's go back in time. When did Saturn conjunct Pluto, Uranus, and Neptune the last time? Well, the previous cycle of Saturn conjunct Pluto was in 1982. And you remember that was a very difficult time. We were in a rolling recessions from 1974 through 1982. One recession after another. We called it stagflation. The stock market was stuck. The economies were stuck. People felt that Japan was taking over, buying out the United States. There was a lot of fear and all kinds of phobia of other cultures taking over our culture. And it continued. The Cold War was very anxiety driven and provoking for people throughout the world. And then the next conjunction came up in 1988, February of 1988. Saturn conjunct Pluto. It was right after the Black Monday, the Black Friday and Black Monday of 1987, the stock market crash. And everybody was really worried about the economy. We're never going to get it back. Something major happened. We had a big crash. The market dropped 40% into October, from August of 87 to October of 87. And people were still scared of that going into 1988. And then 1989, we get Saturn conjunct Neptune. And lo and behold, this was the last waning phase of Saturn to the outer planets. And this was Saturn conjunct Neptune. And this was the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of Soviet-style communism, and the entrance of over 300 million new consumers in the world economy. I would call it a free market economy, but that's, that might be misleading. But it is more free market than the Soviet communist economy was. It was also the time when the internet started becoming a very important force in world economies. Before then we used to buy things at brick and mortar stores, retail outlets. You had to go to the mall, you had to go to the store to get what you wanted. But that began to change in 89 through the early 90s when the internet became the new economic model. And so as Saturn began to separate and go into the opening aspect of not only Pluto, but Uranus and Neptune, a tremendous growth phase for the world economy, and actually the whole psychology of the human collective began to open up as Saturn began to open up and move away from those conjunctions. And this led to 12 years of peace until Saturn reached the opposition, which is the first planet, Saturn opposition Pluto, the first combination to move into the waning phase. And that coincided with the attack on the World Trade Center. So all of these waxing opening aspects of Saturn over to outer planets, and all this world peace and all this growth and excitement we had with the .com and the internet, all that came crashing down after that, as we entered the new era of terrorism. And the next waning aspect to end was Saturn conjunct Uranus. Okay, so Saturn, this wasn't ending, as the waxing was ending. So Saturn waxing ended with the opposition to Uranus in 2008. And that was, in our country, that was the height of the financial crisis. It was also a time, though, that we elected the first Black American president in our history. So it was an interesting time, a very fascinating time, a time of great transformation. The last waning phase of the Saturn to the outer planets was in 2020, Saturn in opposition to Pluto. And that was the pandemic. Okay? So now all the waning phase, the difficult phase of Saturn to the outer planets from 2001 to 2020 is beginning to end as Saturn conjuncts Pluto. This is the first one of the three where it begins to open up. So 2020 was a very, very difficult year, as we know, it's a generational epidemic. The second of the Saturn to the outermost planets was the conjunction to Neptune, which is this year, 2026. So now, as of February 20th, 2/3 of this trio of Saturn transits to outer planets is entering the opening phase. The third and final one will come up in 2032, when Saturn ends its waning phase to Uranus and conjuncts Uranus. After 2032, Saturn will be in the opening phase to Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Okay? And that, to me, is something worth living for, something worth being optimistic about. Because at that point, I think we're going to have a similar revival, renewal of the human ingenuity, the human spirit that has faced adversity, critical times throughout its history, and always come through it. I know we got a lot of doomsayers out in the world today. They're saying this time is different. You know, the world is going to end. We're never going to recover from this. We're going to be ruled by the bots. We're going to be ruled by the robots, by AI. I say no. You know, it's just like Andre Barbault said in his 2012 Planetary Configurations book. This is a relaunch. It's not the peak, it's the relaunch of a splendid movement toward advancement of civilization. So I'm not as harsh, I'm not as negatively judgmental on the future of humanity as many of my peers are in the world today. And I understand why they're negative right now. I mean, this Saturn Neptune in 2026 is actually the midpoint between 2020 and 2032. It's the midpoint. It's also the halfway point of the Jupiter return to the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at 0 Aquarius, the start of this new era, AIRA, coined by astrologer and market analyst Kat Powell. 2020 was the beginning of the first Jupiter-Saturn cycle in air signs that will last consecutively for at least the next 140 years. So that began a new era, and the first Jupiter return to this new era aspect is 2032, the same time, the same year that Saturn conjunct Uranus, which, by the way, happens on near the summer solstice, is 28.5 degrees of Gemini. So again, you got a world point, just like the Saturn Neptune that happened this year was the world point of 0 Aries, and the Jupiter Saturn, it wasn't a world point, was 0 degrees Aquarius. So I'm optimistic. We're now finishing 2/3 of the waning phases of Saturn to the outer planets. The third and final phase will be 2032. I think the following 10 years or so after that will be a time when we, well, first of all, a peace. I think there'll be more world peace then, but there'll also be a sense of renewal and excitement and growth in the world economy and in terms of the collective human spirit. So I'm very optimistic about what's coming up. I think this is a period that Barbault was referring to as relaunch of civilization.
Your optimism will get us through.
I hope so. I believe so.
Keep your eye on the ultimate target. Thank you for that. Tell us where people can get this new book, Jupiter and Saturn Transits, Mastering the Cycles of Life.
Well, right now they can get it through us at mmacycles.com. It will also be available through Amazon. You can get the ebook now. The ebook is out. The printed edition is due out any day now. I think it's actually going to come out in the next 10 days. So www.mmacycles.com, go under books. There's a special going on right now. If you get it by August 10th, before it actually is coming out in printed form, we think, you get a discount. You get a 15% discount. So order now and save yourself a ton of money, 15%. And I'm excited about this book. I think it's been around for a long time, and I think it's only going to grow in its stature as I finish books 2, 3, and 4 over the next 5 years.
Well, you've been more than generous with your time. I have one question, and knowing you the way I do, I think I know the answer to it, but how much time off are you going to take before you start the next one?
Well, that's a good question. I'm going to finish the forecast book, so I'll probably start the next book in January.
Oh, I was going to ask you that. Are you going to do the forecast book for 2027?
Yes.
Parts of it.
Puyan Zolfagarnia is one, as I'm assigning the legacy, the role of writing the forecast book when I make my transition to the cloud. So I'm bringing him in. He did an excellent job last year of identifying the meaning of the outer planets through the signs. So he's going to do that again this year, and he's going to focus this year also on the North Node moving into Aquarius and Chiron moving into Taurus. So you're going to get two more explanations that we didn't cover before. So he'll be covering that. I'll be covering the other half of the opening chapters, on my take on what's going on in the world from a geocosmic point of view. And then along with Puyan, I'll be also sharing the market analysis with Ulrich Aspergren of Lausanne, Switzerland, Johnny DiPoce, and Wyatt Fellows, who's my heir apparent from the company, MMA Cycles. The five of us will continue writing the different markets that we've covered for the last several years. So I'm excited about the next year. It'll be our 51st year. And I'm also excited about apprenticing, mentoring Puyan into the role that I've had with the forecast book, which, by the way, I think is a wonderful thing, the forecast book, because it's revived the whole tradition of astrological almanacs that kind of fell out of favor prior to the start of the forecast book in the late 70s, early 80s. So I'm very proud of the work that I've done and part of the work that my team has done in continuing this tradition, and it's only going to get better in the years ahead.
Well, I'd say for a man in semi-retirement, you're going to crank out a lot of great stuff in the upcoming future. Thank you.
It's very important. It's very important to me to be productive at this phase of my life. I need a purpose in life. I think anybody at my phase of life needs a purpose in life. You don't want to give up. You want to take on bigger challenges. So go big, all you elder youthful people of my generation. Go big, be a young elder, live long, live healthy, and contribute to humanity the best you can. That's my message. And thank you for having me, Thomas. It's been a pleasure, a joy as always to be with you. You are one of the best. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. And let's send everybody back to MMAcycles.com to pick up the book and all the other resources that are there in the shop. And thank you so much for watching.